Chipo walked slowly up the driveway to her uncle's big house in Lusaka, her heart heavy but her face calm. She had borrowed a faded dress from a neighbor, the only thing decent enough to wear for the family dinner. As soon as she stepped through the gate, her cousins noticed her. They leaned close to each other, giggling and whispering loud enough for her to hear. "Look at her clothes. Always looking like she came from the market dust," one of them said, covering her mouth as she laughed. Inside the house, the smell of rich food filled the air, but it only made Chipo feel smaller. The aunties, dressed in shiny wrappers and heavy jewelry, looked her up and down. One of them shook her head and said, "Every time she comes here, it is to eat and beg. Useless girl." The others joined in, their voices cutting sharp like knives. Chipo pretended not to hear, though her chest ached. She greeted them politely, bowing her head, and found a quiet corner to sit. Her stepbrother Bonda arrived late, loud and confident, as if the night belonged to him. He spotted Chipo and smirked. "Ah, the shame of the family has arrived," he announced, his voice booming through the room. "Look at her, always embarrassing us with her poverty." Everyone laughed. The laughter grew, bouncing off the walls like cruel echoes. Chipo kept her eyes low, her hands tight in her lap. She said nothing, but inside her heart burned with pain and silence. When Chipo was only a little girl, her life changed forever. Her father died suddenly, and her mother had already disappeared years before. She was left in the care of her grandmother, a tired old woman who had little but gave everything she could. Their small home was made of mud bricks, the roof patched with rusted iron sheets. When it rained, water dripped through the holes, and they would place buckets around the room to catch it. Yet despite all this, her grandmother always told her, "Education will save you, my child. Never give up." Chipo grew up carrying that hope, even when her stomach was empty. Many mornings she went to school barefoot, her feet dusty and sore from the gravel roads. Other children pointed and laughed at her torn uniform, but she walked on with her head held high. Some days she would faint from hunger in class, but as soon as she woke, she would grab her notebook again. She told herself, "I will not quit." To survive, she worked small jobs after school. She fetched water for neighbors, washed clothes, and even sold vegetables at the roadside market. With every coin she earned, she thought of her grandmother and the promise of a better future. But the rest of the family never lifted a hand to help. Instead, they mocked her. They said she was lazy, useless, always begging. Those words hurt more than hunger. Still, Chipo refused to let them break her spirit. At night, she studied by the light of a small candle, fighting sleep as mosquitoes buzzed around her. Sometimes she cried quietly, wishing her father were still alive to see her struggle. But then she would remember her grandmother's words and wipe her tears. She dreamed of becoming someone important, not for glory, but so she would never again be at the mercy of people who laughed at her suffering. Her life was hard, filled with moments that would crush most people, but Chipo carried her pain like fire in her chest. Every insult, every hungry night, every step taken barefoot to school became fuel for her determination. She was poor, yes, but deep inside she held a strength that no one could steal. And though the world looked at her and saw nothing, she believed that one day she would prove them all wrong. That evening, the air inside the big Lusaka house was loud with chatter and laughter. Plates clattered, children ran around, and the aunties boasted about their children's achievements. Then a hush fell across the room as the door opened. Uncle Mwansa had arrived. He was not a man who came often. In fact, many of the cousins barely knew him, but everyone knew about his wealth. He was the successful one, the businessman with cars, houses, and money that never seemed to end. His presence was like a heavy shadow. Suddenly, everyone sat straighter, voices dropped, and smiles grew wide as they rushed to greet him. Chipo stayed back, watching from her corner. She had no fancy words to offer, only respect. Uncle Mwansa's sharp eyes scanned the room, and he nodded politely as relatives clung to his hands, each one eager to impress him. But he noticed the little things too. He saw how the cousins rolled their eyes when they glanced at Chipo. He heard the soft giggles and cruel whispers as one aunt leaned to another, pointing at Chipo's worn dress. When dinner was ready, Chipo stood up quietly. While others argued about who should sit closest to him, she went straight to the kitchen. With steady hands, she carried his plate, careful not to spill a drop. "Uncle, here is your food," she said softly, bowing her head. Her voice was calm, without the fake sweetness the others put on whenever they spoke to him. She served him with the same care she would give her grandmother, not because he was rich, but because he was family. The room fell strangely quiet for a moment. Some cousins snickered, whispering, "Look at her, trying to impress him now." But Uncle Mwansa said nothing. He accepted the plate with a small nod, his eyes fixed on Chipo for just a second longer than usual. He noticed the way she moved. No greed, no show, only dignity. As the evening went on, laughter rose again, mostly at Chipo's expense. Bonda, her stepbrother, made another loud joke about her beggar's clothes. and the cousins burst into laughter. Chipo lowered her eyes and kept busy clearing plates, pouring drinks, making sure everyone was comfortable, though no one thanked her. Uncle Mwansa stayed silent, but his silence was not empty. Behind his calm face, his thoughts were turning. He saw everything. The way his nieces and nephews fawned over him for his money, the way his sisters gossiped and sneered, the way Bonda mocked a girl who had nothing. And he saw the quiet strength of the one everyone despised. Chipo never raised her voice, never defended herself, yet she carried herself with grace even under humiliation. That night, Uncle Mwansa spoke little. He ate, listened, and let the family laugh as they always did. But inside, he was making notes, tucking away memories. The cruelty, the greed, the fakeness, and above all, the kindness of one girl who had nothing to offer but her heart. Dinner started off lively, with voices rising over each other, plates being passed around, and the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. Chipo moved quietly between the chairs, making sure everyone had what they needed. She served without complaint, even when no one bothered to thank her. Her cousins joked loudly, showing off their new phones and clothes, while she tried to stay unnoticed in the background. Bonda, her stepbrother, had been watching her all evening with mischief in his eyes. He enjoyed every chance to make her small. As Chipo leaned forward to refill a glass of juice, Bonda suddenly bumped his elbow against her. The glass tipped, spilling the bright orange drink all over her faded dress. Gasps filled the room, followed immediately by cruel laughter. "Oh, look at her," one cousin shouted. "She can't even carry a glass without messing up." Another voice added, "It's like she brings bad luck everywhere she goes. A real curse." The aunties shook their heads, clicking their tongues. "Shameful," one said. "Always clumsy, always a problem." Chipo froze for a moment, staring at the wet patch spreading across her dress. The cold juice soaked through the thin fabric, sticking to her skin. Her hands trembled as she tried to brush it off, but the laughter around her grew louder, bouncing against the walls like a cruel chorus. Bonda leaned back in his chair, grinning proudly as though he had just performed a clever trick. Her chest tightened, and tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them see her cry. With her head bowed, she whispered, "Excuse me," and slipped out of the room. Her steps were small, careful, like she was trying not to make any more noise that could draw attention. As the door closed softly behind her, the laughter inside continued. But one pair of eyes had not joined in. Uncle Mwansa sat still, his fork resting against his plate. He had seen everything, the deliberate bump from Bonda, the mocking smiles from the cousins, the satisfied smirks from the aunties. His sharp eyes studied each face, memorizing who had laughed the loudest, who had looked away, and who had chosen silence. He thought about Chipo, her bowed head, her quiet dignity, even in the middle of humiliation. She had not shouted, had not cursed anyone, had not tried to defend herself. She simply walked away, carrying her pain in silence. That silence spoke louder to him than any words could. The noise in the dining room swelled again as the family returned to their gossip and jokes, but Uncle Mwansa barely heard them. He sat in deep thought, the image of Chipo's wet dress and lowered eyes stamped firmly in his mind. To everyone else, it was just another night of mocking the poor girl. To him, it was a revelation. Long after dinner ended, and the family's laughter faded into the night, Uncle Mwansa sat alone in his room, his mind wandering back to a time many had forgotten. It was years ago, during one of his darkest seasons. He had fallen gravely ill, the kind of sickness that makes even strong men feel helpless. Word spread quickly through the family, and at first, everyone came rushing to see him. But when the days stretched into weeks, their visits grew fewer. The whispers began. Maybe his money is finished. Maybe he won't survive. One by one, they stopped coming. His house, once full of noise, became painfully quiet. The friends who used to call disappeared. The relatives who had crowded his living room vanished. Even his own brothers and sisters found excuses not to visit. Everyone abandoned him, except for one small figure who showed up at his gate with a basket in her hand. It was Chipo. She was just a girl then, skinny, with braids that were coming undone. She walked barefoot, carrying herbs her grandmother had prepared. She had no money to buy expensive medicines, but she came with what little she had. Every afternoon, she arrived faithfully, cooking him simple meals of porridge and beans, gently laying the bowl beside his bed. She swept the floor, opened the windows, and made sure he was never alone. She never complained, never asked for anything in return. "Uncle, you must eat," she would say softly, pushing the plate closer to him. Her voice carried no pity, only care. She would sit quietly while he forced the food down, humming little songs to herself as if to chase away the heaviness in the room. When he coughed, she rubbed his back gently. When he grew weak, she fetched water and wiped his forehead with a cloth soaked in cool herbs. At the time, Mwansa was too sick and bitter to speak much. He thought often about how everyone had left him, how all the laughter of the past had turned into silence. But every time he opened his tired eyes, there was Chipo, consistent, humble, loyal. As the weeks passed, his strength slowly returned. By then, the relatives started showing up again, bringing fruit baskets and fake smiles. But in his heart, Mwansa knew who had truly stood by him. It was not the ones with wealth, nor the ones with loud words. It was the poor girl no one respected, the one they called useless. Now, years later, as he watched her walk out of the dining room with juice soaking her dress, that memory burned bright in his mind. She had forgotten those visits, never once bringing them up, never using them to claim favor. But he had not forgotten. In his heart, that bond was carved deep. She had given him loyalty when he had nothing to give in return, and that was something no wealth could ever buy. Weeks later, the news spread like wildfire across Lusaka. Uncle Mwansa was gone. His death came suddenly, without warning. One day he was strong and busy with his businesses. The next he was lying still, never to wake again. The whole family rushed to his mansion, crying loudly, wailing in the way people do when both grief and greed mix together. Some cried for him, but many cried for what they believed he had left behind. The funeral was grand, filled with important people, but even as prayers were said, whispers rose among the family. He had many cars. Did you see the house in Kabulonga? What about the farm? Their voices were low, but their eyes gleamed with hunger. Chipo stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, her heart heavy. To her, Uncle Mwansa had been more than just a wealthy man. He was the only one who had looked at her with eyes that truly saw. Days later, the family gathered again, this time at a lawyer's office in the center of Lusaka. The room was crowded and hot, filled with perfumes, jewelry, and sharp voices. Everyone squeezed into chairs, leaning forward eagerly. The atmosphere felt less like mourning and more like a market where people had come to claim their share. I know for sure he left the mansion to me, one aunt declared proudly, fanning herself. Huh, you. He promised me one of his businesses, another uncle snapped. Bonda smirked, stretching his legs confidently. He always liked me best. I'm the one who deserves the companies. Who else can manage them? As the bickering grew louder, eyes shifted toward Chipo, sitting quietly in the corner. She wore a simple dress, her hands folded on her lap. One cousin sneered at her. You. Don't even bother waiting. You will get nothing. Not even a spoon. Another laughed. Yes, you'll inherit dust. Maybe he left you his old slippers. The room erupted with cruel laughter. Chipo lowered her eyes. She had expected nothing, so their words did not shock her. Still, the sting was there, sharp and heavy. She remembered all the times the family had mocked her, and now here they were again, greedy and shameless even in death. The lawyer entered at last, carrying a folder thick with papers. The room hushed immediately. The greedy smiles returned, everyone leaning forward as if the words on those papers would crown them kings and queens. Chipo sat still, her heart beating slowly. She was used to being overlooked. She was ready for them to laugh again when her name was never mentioned. No one knew, as they sat there buzzing with hunger, that Uncle Mwansa's sharp eyes had not forgotten a thing, and that the quiet girl in the corner was about to shake their world. The lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. The room went completely silent. Every relative leaned forward in their chairs, hearts pounding, eyes shining with greed. Chipo sat at the back, quiet as always, her hands folded tightly. She was the only one not expecting anything. The lawyer opened the folder and began to read in a calm, steady voice. To my nephew Joseph. Everyone turned their heads. Joseph grinned proudly, already imagining something big. I leave my wristwatch collection. The smile froze on Joseph's face. A few cousins snickered behind their hands. To my sister, Miriam. The aunt straightened her wrapper and smiled wide. I leave my old sewing machine. The room erupted with laughter. Miriam gasped, insulted, and muttered under her breath. Sewing machine? What am I, a tailor? To my brother Patrick, the lawyer continued, ignoring the whispers. Patrick puffed out his chest, ready for riches. I leave a set of books from my library. His jaw dropped. Books? What will I do with books? One by one, names were called. Each greedy relative received something small. A set of chairs, a framed picture, a simple radio, or even kitchen pots. The more the lawyer read, the more uneasy the room became. Smiles started to fade. Murmurs grew louder. They shifted in their seats, waiting for the real treasures to be announced. Everyone was sure the lawyer was only starting small. The cars, the mansion in Kabulonga, the businesses, the bank accounts, those had to be coming next. Bonda sat tall, his grin wide. He was certain his name would be tied to the biggest inheritance. He trusted me, Bonda whispered loudly enough for others to hear. You'll see. The businesses are mine. The lawyer kept reading slowly, carefully, until the smaller gifts were finished. Then he closed the first paper, pulled out another sheet, and paused. The silence was thick, like the whole room was holding its breath. He looked around the faces staring at him, some impatient, some sweating, some smiling with forced calm. This, the lawyer said, his voice deliberate, is the most important part of the will. The family sat straighter, hearts racing. Aunts gripped their handbags. Uncles leaned forward with their elbows on the table. Cousins exchanged excited glances. They were certain this was the moment their lives would change forever. The lawyer glanced at the paper again, then let the pause stretch long. The tension was unbearable. Someone coughed nervously. Another aunt whispered, "It must be the house." He is about to say the house. Chipo sat still, barely breathing, almost invisible at the back. No one imagined her name would ever come up. All eyes were on the lawyer, waiting for the words that would crown one of them the new owner of Mwansa's empire. The lawyer finally looked up, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. He cleared his throat once more. The next words on his lips were about to turn the entire room upside down. The lawyer's voice was calm, but his next words crashed into the room like thunder. He read slowly, every syllable heavy. "To my beloved niece Chipo, who showed me kindness when no one else did, I leave all my properties, my businesses, and every account in my name." For a heartbeat, the room went completely still. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock. No one moved. No one breathed. Then chaos erupted. One aunt let out a sharp scream and clutched her chest as if she had been stabbed. Another cousin's eyes rolled back, and she fainted, collapsing into the arms of the person beside her. The uncles shouted at once, their voices crashing together. "This cannot be true. He was tricked. Where is the real will?" Bonda shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward. His face twisted with shock, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the right words. Finally, he shouted, "No, this is a lie. How can a beggar inherit everything? She doesn't deserve even a coin." His hands shook as he pointed at Chipo, his voice breaking with desperation. Chipo sat frozen in her chair, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. All the mansions, the cars, the businesses everyone had fought over, all of it was hers? Her heart pounded so hard she thought the others could hear it. Tears filled her eyes and rolled down her cheeks, not from greed, but from the weight of it all. She remembered her hungry walks to school, her grandmother's sacrifices, the insults that had followed her all her life. And now everything had changed. The lawyer repeated the words to quiet the noise. Yes, all properties, all businesses, and all accounts belonged to Chipo. He set the papers firmly on the table, leaving no room for argument. The cousins began wailing as though someone had died all over again. "It's not fair," they cried. "She is nothing. We are his real family." The aunties who once mocked Chipo's clothes now shouted at the lawyer, demanding explanations. Bonda, his pride shattered, dropped to his knees. His voice cracked as he begged, "Please, Chipo. We are brother and sister. You can't take everything. Share it with us, I beg you." But Chipo was too stunned to answer. She sat in silence, her tears streaming, her mind caught between disbelief and gratitude. She thought of Uncle Mwansa's eyes the night of the dinner, how he had watched her quietly while the others laughed. She realized then, he had seen her worth when no one else had. The room that once echoed with laughter at her expense now buzzed with cries of desperation. For the first time, it was not Chipo being mocked, it was everyone else begging at her feet. And as the reality sank in, she understood. Her life would never be the same again. The room was still buzzing with disbelief when the relatives changed their tone. A few minutes ago, they had been mocking, shouting, even cursing her name. Now their voices softened, their faces stretched into fake smiles. "My dear Chipo," one aunt cooed, sliding closer. "You know I have always loved you like my own daughter. You are such a blessed girl." "Yes, yes," another added quickly. "We were only joking before. You know how families tease. Don't take it to heart." Chipo looked at them quietly. She could see the desperation in their eyes, the way their hands twitched nervously, the way their smiles never reached their faces. Then Bonda stepped forward. The same Bonda who had poured juice on her, who had called her the shame of the family. Now he fell to his knees right in front of her. His voice shook as he begged, "Sister, forgive me. I didn't mean those things. We are family blood. Please, you cannot enjoy all this wealth alone. Help us. Help me." His eyes were wide, his pride shattered. The cousins who once laughed at her clothes now pressed close, their voices soft as honey. "Chipo, we are proud of you. You are the star of this family now. We always knew you were special." Their words dripped with lies. Chipo wiped her tears slowly and stood up. The room grew silent. She looked around, meeting every pair of eyes one by one. Her voice was calm, steady, but it cut sharper than a knife. "You mocked me when I had nothing," she said. "You laughed at my torn dress, at my hunger, at my bare feet. You called me useless. You called me a curse. When I served you food, you spat insults at me. When I greeted you with respect, you pushed me aside like dust." Her words hung heavy in the air. No one moved. No one dared to interrupt. "And now," Chipo continued, her eyes steady on Bonda, who still knelt before her, "you kneel before me because of money. You mocked me for being poor. Yet now your greed is poorer than my hunger ever was." The silence was so deep that even the lawyer lowered his eye. The relatives who had once laughed the loudest now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their shame written on their faces. Banda's lips trembled, but no words came out. Chipo turned away, her heart no longer heavy. For the first time in her life, she felt the power of her own voice. She did not need their approval, nor their fake kindness. She finally understood what her grandmother had always told her. Dignity cannot be stolen, and kindness is remembered longer than cruelty. The family begged again, but their voices sounded small now. Chipo had spoken, and her words had closed a chapter forever. Months passed, and Chipo's life changed in ways she had never imagined. The mansion her relatives once dreamed of was now her home. The cars in the driveway were hers, the businesses under her name. But instead of wasting her inheritance on luxury, Chipo's heart turned to the children who lived the life she once knew, hungry, barefoot, and forgotten. She opened a charity in Lusaka for orphans, building a safe place where children could eat, sleep, and go to school without shame. Every morning, she visited, sitting with them as they ate porridge, reminding them that their future was bright. "Do not give up," she told them gently, "because even the smallest seed can grow into a strong tree." The children adored her, not because she was rich, but because she understood their pain. At the mansion, life was peaceful. The same relatives who once mocked her kept their distance now, too ashamed to face the truth. Only Banda still lingered, his pride broken, his greed stronger than ever. One late afternoon, as Chipo's car rolled toward the mansion gate, she saw him standing there. His clothes were dirty, his eyes desperate. He rushed forward, banging on the car window. "Please, sister, just a little money. I have nothing." His voice cracked, filled with hopelessness. Chipo looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were calm, her heart steady. Without a word, she signaled the driver to continue. The gates opened wide, and the car glided past, leaving Banda behind in the dust. Her grandmother's words echoed in her heart. "Never mock the poor, for tomorrow's fortune may silence your laughter." And that day, her silence spoke louder than any revenge ever could.